May I just thank Rory McKiernan and all of those who have been making tributes. I have to tell you about when I first met Rory McKiernan, and when I remember visiting him at the different organisations to which he brought into being and to which he contributed so much, like Spun Out and others, I was immediately struck by something, and that was the combination of intellect and energy. I've been thinking about what I might say, because I want to say how honoured I am to be getting this award from the people who are giving it to me. I think that this is such an important movement and an important organisation, and to see so many organisations represented and working together on common purpose is very much what we need at the present time. I've said that Rory impressed me by just energy and intellect combined, but looking in this stage of my long life, I have to say that is actually the most important moral question in the end, is how was your energy in its different stages delivered? It enables one to confront the issues of individualism versus cooperation, and so many other reasons. I do think there's so many, the most important thing, as I said in Irish, for me anyway, is the enormous number of organisations represented, and your membership secretary and your chairman may it continue and may it flourish. In the old days, I remember when Noel Brown and I used to ask questions at seminars and said, what do you want? And I said that the most important thing is for us to be rushed past with groups of people who are anxious to do even more. And that is very, very important. It's a topic to which I'll return, if I may, in just a moment. I think, in a way, that commitment is something. It's made possible by people in the front line. It has been made possible for myself at different levels, including quite high levels, but it is made possible as well by the people who believe in the morality of humanity and of equality and inclusion and diversity, and who work quietly behind the scenes, gathering money, distributing leaflets, having the courage to stand their ground on the street of the important issues, be it about migrants or travellers or whatever. I have to say that there's only one word that I would be less than honest if I didn't say it, and that is that I believe that the word development should change altogether. I think we need a new word, and that new word I am myself in favour of confronting the economics of it all head on by speaking about a globalization from below. This enables us to draw distinction in very, very important areas, it seems to me. Like, for example, managing the transition from humanitarian relief to having the courage to question structures is a very, very important, has been important to me in all the issues that I was involved. And what that means, I decided, working in my latest on, for example, sustainability for food in Africa. And here I have run into, again, a division. Just remember, from that first person that left Africa and travelled around the world to today, is a journey from 2,000 sources of food to a dependence on foreign arrivals of wheat, maize, and rice. The seeds in Africa, when I began writing about it, were controlled by 4 companies. Today it is 2. In relation to fertilizer and others, 80% of what is transported, again by an oligarchy, composed of both Russian and Ukrainian members, is again there. Now I have the question. Should I talk about this? I've spent so much of my 14 years answering that question. In my view, it would be ridiculous and immoral and a contradiction of what those people paying me tribute if I didn't. But yet I have to say this. 1.4 billion people in Africa, the youngest population in the continents of the world. And here is my view. I offer it in a way that to replace the word development by reintroducing anthropology. And anthropology in the 19th century was used as an instrument to dominate Africa, to change its legal system, to change its languages, and so forth. And unfortunately, when the colonial powers were thrown out of so many academies in Africa in the 60s, expelled from some, just packing up and going home, and others, I worked with them in Manchester University and elsewhere. But the fact is, the methods, the instruments of anthropology were also lost. So you would be much better off constructing an African anthropology for an African people that realizes that Africa existed before colonization and that there were myriad sources of civilization, myriad ways of, I remember it very, very well, the inability of Western negotiators to recognize the instrument they had available to them in the clan system. I ran into that in Somalia back so long ago. But all I'm saying, because I want to be positive now, is that people need to look at these instruments that are being used to blind us from the facts. And I had difficulty because food security in Africa can be met by following the existing multinational model about the movement of food in monopolized conditions and imposing it on Africa. I am a minority in making this argument. When I offered it in Senegal, it was welcomed by Africans, and particularly African women, but opposed, really, by representatives of the European Union, of which we are a member. So let me be honest about it here. Reviving, extending the existing model of moving food to Africa and Asia and South America. You either make that choice of keeping this inadequate model going, or you use the opportunities that we've had for study and so on to put a different model in place. It is the same. It is the same bad thinking that has made it unable in the world to do a proper study on migration. The response at the present time is a competition of establishing hubs in countries that are made dependent, so that where human rights are not respected, be it again in the idea of people described as the worst kind of criminals and whatever, being moved to, mostly from South America, they are moved to South Sudan, or the illegal stuff that is in North Africa at the request of the Prime Minister of Italy. Look, why do I say all of this? The necessity to be able to speak frankly. I will have opportunities, I hope, to develop on all of these things in the future. But I have to say that, reference was made to that work, Power to the People, which recounts much of what I wrote in Hot Press. I was writing in Hot Press because Irish media wouldn't publish what we were doing and saying, including descriptions of massacre. And they wouldn't be in print if it hadn't been for Niall Stokes saying to me, I will publish anything as long as it's between 800 words and 1,800 words. And there was no censorship. And he often paid the price for that. I also believe this much, and this is, think hard on this. Why is Ireland one of the countries that has no United Nations committee? We had one twice. We had one, it wasn't very well. It was revived by Colm O'Brien and Warren. And then it was run by a senator and one HEO. It cost $60,000 a year to run, and it was one of the things immediately dropped in the cuts when they came after 2008. Everything that is said in the United Nations should be available to the public. But I'll say this because I need to say it. There is a hostility to the public being involved in foreign policy. I fought it when I tried to establish a Foreign Affairs Committee first, and I got 5 votes. Then in the 1980s, others we got more, and a Foreign Affairs Committee was established. And it is well meant. But as a distinguished speaker at that time said, that we may have a mandate, but the publics are emotional, and it's best left to the experts. And the experts who feel very often that it is some kind of honour to come in on the tail of other people's arguments. This is why education on all of these issues that are important, the history of colonisation, the history of exclusion against gender, the mistreatment of women and children, all these issues, what people on the ground, and I've been there, have asked for. This is what they say. Let us draw on our own memory, our own practices, and our own cultures to see how we can use nature better. Remember what they were what the beginning of what they were condemned to. Back in the 17th century, Francis Bacon said it, and it's all in it. I lead to you nature and her children in bondage for your use to tear out her secrets. It's all there, and it's still there in a lot of ways, because this is why education is so important, so that they can in turn spread the news in the public, that if you have a foreign policy and you say it is based on international law and respect for it, well, then you must practice it. Whereas we have at the present time. Just remember, I have collected a number of honorary doctorates in the last 14 years. But when I think of the universities I visited in the United States that are being forced to roll over unless they remove diversity, equality, and inclusion from their charters. And some of them are capitulating. Of all people, Harvard are resisting. Just want to say this because I don't want to delay you too long. If I have been involved, I'm so delighted that Colin McNamara is here because that says something. What a great example he is of the combination of technology and music and so on, but also, more importantly, at the front of all of the campaigns I've been involved in, there are always the artists, often the people with the most precarious income. I beg your pardon for having to mention some important things to me. Reference was made to, for example, reference was made to the different times as I was working with the Trócaire. In a photograph behind my desk is an image of Sally O'Neill Sanchez, who accompanied me to just not Savannah. We would look to visit refugee camps in Honduras, in Chile, Nicaragua, Ethiopia, Somalia, Brazil. And this is something you'll have to learn yourselves. We thought we were on the verge of a great breakthrough, but I'll never forget how do you think it feels to me? Sally and I wrote, you'll find it in the book, about the massacre at Mohote. And for 10 years we were accused of having invented it. An American ambassador held a press conference in Salvador and said I had made it all up. Now, 10 years afterwards, the bodies are exhumed. They're just over 1,000. They're mostly elderly people, people with disability and children, because the other people were able to run. Now, I went back as president, and we celebrated the fact that the Salvadorian government has said, yes, there was state involvement, and yes, there was American supervision and training of the people who were involved. The Inter-American Court used the word genocide in relation to the Morrison. I can discuss this again. But why? Look at the people who were involved. Sally O'Neill. Sally O'Neill I knew all my life, in many ways. And she came into Trócaire in a way with the experience of travelling to school with her sister and her sandwich being taken from her hand and somebody putting a foot in it and saying, now eat it. Sally was committed. It was therefore that everything she knew, and she knew much, used by the Vatican, for example, as a major advisor in relation to migrants in the overcrowded new urban cities. But what she had was, in fact, a heart that was continually questioning the morality of the different competences that she had. And I think on occasions like this, too, because I have to, I think of those 8 people murdered in Salvador. Ella Correa and his colleagues, Julia, her housekeeper, and Celia, her daughter, and so on. Celia's daughter, whose hand was cut off, as an example to anyone who would be in any way assisting those working for change. And afterwards, as I held the press conference in all those years ago, an American ambassador to Nicaragua, as he was then, was helping out in Salvador. And I said to him about that time, you know, this is 1980, this is 1981. I said, what about the literacy program, the Cardinal brothers and everything they're doing? Why not try that? And he opened a map in front of me and he said, having said, if I had known you were coming, I would have served you green beer. So he sprawled in his chair and he took out the map. And he said, it begins with literacy, and then it's cooperatives, but I'll tell you what it is, communism. And that individual was part of the knowledge of the people who went and murdered 6 Jesuits in 6 different parts of their house that I visited, and their housekeeper and her daughter Celia. I have to say, Sabina is with me. We had young children, 4, at the time when I was heading off on those expeditions. I have to say, nearly all of them with the warning that we cannot, in fact, they were not without government. The plebiscito in Chile, no government paid any fare to any of these things, be it Salvador. It was at the invitation of Trócaire I went to so many. And I also had to deal in Oras and Outram with something else. And that was a conservative move by some members in a well-known conservative party saying things like, for example, Trócaire should be about the elimination of poverty. These issues of justice are political. How often in my life I would hear it all again. You should have a president who didn't ever say anything about moral issues. That you should just simply read out often what is badly informed, not very well written, as a kind of a platitude to fulfill your role. I do think, when I think of it, that it is necessary, but it's not necessary to be pessimistic. It's just necessary to have the courage to realize, as I have to have in Salvador, where a completely fascist president is now locking people without rights and so forth. And so you will have reverses. But your best way of handling reverses is, as so many of the tributes have said, by concentrating that it can all be reversed. And it can all be reversed when people who are working in the development area begin using a different word. Say that when you mean development, you mean transformative development. Put that word after it. Otherwise, the quiet racism that visited the modernization theory will prevail and be extended. By that I mean 5 books produced in Princeton, Gabriel Almond, Lucien Barba, all of these. And I remember it well. The invitation to be postgraduate work, as Orlando Falls Borda has written, an invitation from people like myself and him to come and look at the backwardness of our country and the factors that were inhibiting the inevitable movement towards the modern industrialized system that was the Western world. I think it's time now to just, why do I say it like this? Because it is necessary. You can't, do you want to be an addition to what is failing and isn't working, or do you want to work in the thing of transformation? I believe that, for example, that when money is spent in relation to women and children and production of food, the mud and the soil is capable of producing an oven, and the sun is there to provide solar energy and whatever. But you will have people saying, but you should be importing this. Food security is about hunger, but also about sufficiency, nutrition, but more important about stunting and all of that. But if you provide it, as indeed people like Ian Good and others and Anne, his partner, are suggesting, basic universal development, basic universal services, food, health, education, you immediately help participation. And from that ground-up participation comes the very necessary changes in leadership. And that is what I mean by saying the campaign should be globalization from below. Globalization from above is a continuation of the poisoning of the world, the dividing of the world, the creation of conflict. It is a quiet racism, of course, when it addresses difference. I think in many ways education is vital in interpreting history. Can I say what I dealt with in many, many ways? The struggle we have had. I spoke recently to giving the famine memorial lecture. The struggle we had in facing up to the fact that the people were made the victim of an economic theory. And the people cannot be made the victim of an economic theory now either. The ideas, our papers are full of the great threat of the fallout between oligarchs. But I was delighted to people, our great General Secretary O'Shea of the Nurses Union are saying, it will not come at the cost of the security of workers. It must not come at the cost of any changes. So therefore, I think it's very difficult. I'll finish it now just simply saying this. It is times change. Who knew that we'd have an American president that believes that God sent him to have the Olympics and to have the soccer? But now in addition to it all, he says, I have it all, he said. And there is something that must be. Why should any citizen anywhere in the world not work for human rights, but not, just every now and again cast a glance at the idea of the oligarchs in rule? This is what must be opposed. I think in relation to just cliches and others, there is something, my very final word. It is very possible, very important, not to give ground away by actions that are so easily abused by an authoritarian response. I think you have to be very sophisticated and go to the depth of the thing, as well as having the courage, as Sabina and I, others know so many of you who joined us in struggles in Galway City and elsewhere and abroad. I just think that, and I find it hard, I'm just now being totally honest with you. I was last in Gaza in 2006. I visited there with Andres Van Act, and we produced a plan. It was the year after Israel gave up Gaza. And Gaza is now being occupied again. And the West Bank is being savaged by people who are destroying homes. And in Jerusalem, the most sacred places of the different religious systems are being abused. I think it's all capable of being changed. But it's very what and I mean by saying about the response. The slightest mistake by those on the left has always been exaggerated, misrepresented, misreported. And then the government says, we have to respond to this. And the response is authoritarian. And then the response will become more authoritarian. And then the conditions for fascism. So the thing to do is to know where to make your move in relation to every aspect. That's why it's so important that the best economics at the moment is being written by trade unionists and others. the best views in relation to work are in fact coming from people who are treated. So I think in relation to it all then, it's interesting that even Pope Leo XIV has gone back to the original document of Rerum Novarum, which spoke of the rights of workers. I want to thank you. It's wonderful to receive this award, for which I do so with humility, and as I said, having mentioned all those who worked with me. But also I do say, one's heart would have to lift. So many different organizations in so many different aspects, and the membership coming into them. There is no doubt whatsoever, it is possible to achieve the transformation that will bring into reality all of the things that you all have been working so hard for. Is Gwimgog Ragus Banach Dari Snihirok Tishin, August Come August Fedelum, by me a cordial live. Thank you very much. Yeah.